Welcome to Conversations with Healers, a podcast and video interview series that features intimate, soulful, and cozy conversations with self-healers and healers. Healer to healer, we dive into all aspects of self-healing and healing, and being and becoming a healer. I am Damla Aktekin. I'm a healer and the host of this podcast, and I can't wait for you to listen to this conversation.
All right.
Hello, everyone. This is Damla Aktekin with A Drop of Om. And I'm so excited to have Diane here, Diane Murphy. And we're going to dive right in. Diane, I met you in Dover, actually, Dover, New Hampshire, where you were you're an educator. You're an English, or would you prefer English literature?
Oh, no, really English history, reading, a middle school English language arts is what we call it.
Okay.
But
so you're a teacher.
Right.
You work with young teens and teens.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw the first time I met you is I was taking my daughter to ballet class, and I saw the sign about Big Fish, and I was immediately drawn to it. So tell us about it. What is Big Fish? What do you do at Big Fish?
So I know, and people always go, "Why do you call this place Big Fish?" One of the kids asked me that yesterday, and part of it is, it kind of brings this like playful image to mind, and it really comes from the idea that we're all big fish in our own minds. And as an English teacher, we deal in metaphors. And metaphors are king, and actually, I think in language, metaphors are everything. Because that's how we can understand each other. So that's that. We want young people to come and help them discover their big fish, discover and be led and lead themselves with their interests and passions.
Yeah. So tell us about what I know that you work with young teens and teens that are. What's the container?
Yeah,
what do you do exactly?
Yeah, so the background is that I spent 30 years teaching in public school, grades 6, 7, and 8, which is 12 to 14-year-olds, and then also community college, dual enrollment students. And over the last 10 years or so, schools in the United States have become more and more structured, more premeditated in their lessons, and generally more coercive. Forcing kids to do a lot of things they don't want to do. So I started seeing my caseload of students, so to speak, my 70 to 100 students a year. I started watching more and more of them become not well in different ways. Some of them anxious, some of them depressed, some of them obsessive compulsive, and apathetic also was a really big concern. And it's not only the school environment, but because there's so many factors with social media and just life. But the schools, I believe I was being a part of something that was doing more harm than good for too many kids. So I had the luxury of my youngest graduating college, paying off our home, so not having a mortgage. So my husband said, "Go ahead, quit, and do this dream." So the dream is to hold a space, basically, for people to be human first. That's kind of our motto.
For the young teens.
For the young people and even
the teachers.
And the mentors and the teachers and the staff, for us all to be in a place together where we love learning, but we are human first. And the one criteria, the condition for coming to Big Fish is, number one, you have to want to be there, and you have to be kind. And basically, if you start there, it's pretty fun.
Place to start. And I love that. And I want to come back to, first of all, to me, you're a healer. Thank you. What you do, in the container you create for young people to be themselves and to learn. So Big Fish is also about self-directed learning, right?
That's it, right.
So they can follow their interests and
And so the funny thing about self-directed learning is, we have all these people like, oh, I want to work with kids. I want to teach them everything I know about chemistry. I love chemistry, or whatever it is. But a lot of our kids coming out of school do this thing we call deschooling. So some of them are just so exhausted, and it's really, they have to go through this, not all of them, and everyone has a different, phase of it. But they just have to sort of, they don't even know what they like. They've been so programmed and been so directed that they've been getting, for the grades, and they're just like, oh, wow, I had no idea I liked art. I like making things. Or I had no idea science was really cool. And, we can go out to the estuary and, start doing observations and water testing. So I think it's just a lot of discovery in the beginning. And I never really thought of myself as a healer, so to speak, but I guess, I've always been someone who cared about the person first before the test. It always seemed to me kind of ridiculous to think about a number. Something. Yeah, if the person is not having an okay time being human.
Yes. And I want to come back to, in the website you say, big fish is my big leap of faith. So how's that going for you these days?
Well,
do you still feel like, is it a daily leap of faith exercise?
A lot less anxiety than I had a year ago. And you were so helpful helping me sort of sort that through. I think that we are grassroots. It's really happening. Like, people are starting to recognize that we have a system of education that is archaic. It's no longer appropriate for humans. We're locking kids up all day. We're telling them what to learn when it's just not natural. Carol Black is one of the writers I follow, and she says, studying kids in schools is like studying the killer whales in SeaWorld. They're confined. So we need to do something different all across the world. I mean, this is happening. We have, so we're part of the Alliance for Self-Directed Learning. We align ourselves with, freedom. Really, it's really basic. And even people I've met in conferences talk about compulsory schooling as being a human rights abuse for kids. If it works for you or your kid, great. Like, I have 2 kids. It worked for one and it didn't really work for the other. So if you're going to a place every day that it's really you watch these kids, and their whole being does not want to be there. We have a new member who is coming out of something called, I don't know how many weeks he went away for, but it was maybe close to a month, of school refusal therapy. Just bend your mind around that for a minute. School refusal therapy. And it was an in-house treatment, right? This is a beautiful kid. This kid is 13. He's brilliant, maybe tight on the spectrum, maybe just a bit on the spectrum, but he walked into Big Fish, and the first thing he said to one of the younger members was, oh, I can help you build a computer. And he's so happy to be here, but a month ago he was saying, I would rather die than go to school.
Yeah. I think I want to make like a little parenthesis saying, like, this isn't about, like, we're not trying to convert someone or shame someone for having
school
kids in the school
for a lot of us.
But perhaps being aware of or thinking a little bit more about, like, what do young people need.
Well, so this is the good news. You asked me about the leap. So the good news is that the school community, and it wasn't the one of my ward where I worked, but is the neighboring one, they've been incredibly wonderful. They've been, we have meetings often. I meet every couple of months with the superintendent, where I'm meeting next week with the state commissioner. And they know what we're doing is what kids need. Kids need freedom in order to learn and grow, and they just don't know how to do it. So we're talking about partnerships and building what we call an educational ecosystem. So for the kids, and luckily a lot of kids love school. I mean, there were, I don't know if I loved it, but I loved it enough, to make it work for me. But then there are places kids can go if they don't love it or if they need to be outdoors.
I love that. I think it's that awareness of like what works for the specific kid in mind. So I want to jump to another point, which I know is one of your strengths because I saw it in action. So basically, back to our story, I saw the sign of Big Fish, and I looked at your website, and there were some inquiries about people. You were opening it up to people who wanted to contribute. So I immediately contacted you, and we started this. I started a meditation and mindfulness course for the kids. And then through that, you and I worked a little bit. You came to me as a healing client. But in my time there, one of the things, well, two things, but the first one I saw is that how you were very skillfully involving people in being cheerleaders and supporters. Like I saw moms volunteering, I saw these teachers popping up to talk about politics or whatever else is going on, like history. I know you involve some of your family to do field trips and such. So tell us about like what is that about?
So I guess that's a big part of it where well, some of my background, aside from teaching for so long, was also that I ran the theater program. And it was a community, everybody wins in the theater. That's how I always used to like to premise it, because you got your tech people and, your artists, your singers, your actors, and, you work together to create something beautiful. And I think also coming from a really dysfunctional family, when you're a kid and you know that you're witnessing this dysfunction, that you go, oh, wow, I can imagine. Like I've always just imagined what community would look like when people were just being their better selves, and being encouraged to be their better selves, right? And being provided the resources in the environment. So we have 3 of our teachers are on disability, and they have definite disabilities like narcolepsy and blindness and autoimmune disease, but yet they have anywhere from 2 to 10 hours a week to be with us, and so they're volunteers. And some of them we do pay a little bit. Some of our people who come to us to teach, and not everyone has a disability, but it's a win-win. So we have community members, some family members who just really like people, and especially young people. And that's the piece, I think, where we're in a shift. And we've been on this rapid fire. It seems like time has gone so fast and technology is just speeding us along. And I'm going to quote Marianne Williamson. And she, probably your audience may know her, The Course in Miracles, but I met her a few weeks ago. And with about 35 women, we had a lovely conversation with her. First words out of her mouth, she says, we need to mine the gold of our children, the gold within our children. They are gold. And so Maddie, who you've met, she just had this incredible art show, and she's just made like over $1,000 selling art that people are begging for because she's doing her thing. She's like being her best human,
what she's meant to be.
Right, and so the idea that somebody has to teach you how to be human rather than discovering how to be human, like because you are.
Okay.
So there we go. Community.
Which brings me to a beautiful. You're just coming into a beautiful point, which is how does that self-healing? Like, how do we heal from that conditioning of this is who you're supposed to be? Like this is. So for you, how that went, the self-healing, and what do you see in young people?
Yeah. So my own self-healing, from a couple rounds of therapy, being in my 20s first. I started having panic attacks. I was like, "Whoa, what's wrong? What's this?" But I think when you bring enough people who have wisdom to the table, when you're a young woman or a young man, is that I've learned that it's an inside job, and nobody ever really told me that when I was younger. We became this very codependent, looking for all these external things to make us feel okay in the world or good enough. And I think the good enough piece, some of us really struggle with that, especially women. I think women are always feeling like, I'm not good enough. I have to do everything, So my own healing is, I think, basically teaching in a classroom for 30 years is like having your own laboratory. So, and you get to restart and restart every year. So I'd get 70 to 100 kids, in 20 groups of 20 or 25. And it's really a lucky job, because I think in some ways, I was like, well, this didn't go as I had hoped. So maybe if I try to be more open or try to, give them more voice. I mean, it was just always workshopping, like, what do young humans need? And I got really clear about that. I mean, when you practice something for 30 years, you get really clear about it. And what they want and what they need is to just be treated like you would treat your best friend, like they want to be treated like adults. They don't want to be infantilized. We basically if you think of, and I love school. I don't want school to necessarily go away. I spent my life in school. But we needs to flip from directed teaching to mentorship. They want to be seen. And I think we all want to be seen. My mother passed in January and spent some time, her last few months of her life, in a nursing home. And it's the same thing with the elderly. It's the same thing with those of us in our middle years. Like, people just want to be seen. Yeah. So that's where I felt, there was the beauty of the one-room schoolhouse that couldn't have all the resources. And now we've just gone to the ultimate factory of depersonalization. And I do believe that it is a major cause in why we are having a soul crisis in America and across the planet. I mean, we have dictatorships, seizing the opportunity of people who are confused and lost.
Okay.
So that's
so as I know you have grown children, but as a mom, as they were growing up, and as an educator who holds space and creates space and enters into these dynamics, how do you find that your own self-healing affects that?
Oh, it's a direct hit. And actually, when you start doing the work, right, it's like when you don't do the work, it bites you. I mean, it's all about reflection and time. So the first thing I wrote on my bathroom mirror for about 2 years was slow down, which I'm not really good at sometimes, because it's like you're running a nonprofit and you don't really know how to do it. You have to work a lot. But no, I also have days where I just surrender and go, oh, yeah, here now. And we try to do that with the kids, and they love it. Like, we have a yoga class on Thursdays. We use a dance studio. Mm-hmm. And
you're also, I need to say, like, having worked with you as a client, you were pretty good with, you're like, Damla, I'm coming.
Oh, yeah.
This time for me. And you're good with taking that time for yourself.
Well, that's the thing I notice also about, and it's self-healing, right? So the piece around what's happening in the world right now, and when I first met you, and you were probably like the first one to show up in like a perfect way, and I was so honored that you showed up, because everything you do with mindfulness and resilience was like all of this practice I was trying to sneak into my classroom, but all the people, not all, but I would say 90% of the people showing up to help Big Fish are middle-aged women, moms and sisters and aunts and grandmothers. And it's not that the men aren't showing up, because the men are starting to come along, but that's where I feel the planet has just really gotten off tilt. It's like, and Marianne talks about this, and I love that about her. She'll say, come on, the mamas, the feminine, we need a course correction. And I think Big Fish for me is my course. It's like locally our course correction. And I think the more whole being men, the more awake men, like the superintendent in Dover, New Hampshire, he's a grandfather of 5, and he totally gets it. He's saying, yes, he has all these women who work around him. I think he's the only guy, special ed, alternative ed. And he's so open. He's like, yes, you're right. We just haven't figured out. It's like, how do you change the infrastructure, right? And the mindset.
Yes. Okay, so I want to come to one of my favorite things about walking into Big Fish is you have this table in front, and I don't know if you still do it, but you would put like a weekly poem.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up.
You would have these cutouts for people to pick, and they were the most amazing poetry. Really inspiring, really deep. Can you tell more about healing powers?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say poetry is one of the most important things in my life. But it's language, right? It's language. About 10 years ago, I started a practice of just beginning each class with a poem. And, when I look back on it now, it's kind of funny because they didn't have a choice, right? But I was like, well, and not long poems, but just there's so many beautiful poets, and it's truth, right? So I do. And I have brought with me Rumi, Mary Oliver, whatever, there's some great poets. So I would start it, and I noticed this effect. If you just start with the language, it's like starting with a piece of music, or starting with a gentle yoga pose or whatever it is. But it became a discipline. And it was my experiment, and it went on for about 10 years. And it changed me, and it changed the classroom. Because then that's where the metaphor comes in, right? Because figurative language gives us a way to understand each other. Because like you come from Turkey and, I come from Cape Cod, right? But I can say, those days when, there's the ocean,
the emotion is the same.
The emotion,
the
right.
humanness.
Right. The sensory, the sharing of being alive in our senses that is so human that we have cross-culturally, every divide. So I think poetry unifies us. And so my experiment, I noticed within months that, kids were speaking more in poems. They were more open to just kind of bantering in poems and just playing with language, really, because humans like to be clever. So I started, the funny thing, reason I was so glad that you talked about poetry is because the bandwidth thing, I haven't been doing that in the last couple months. I just wouldn't keep up with it. So I was doing a poem a week at Big Fish. And when we first opened, I said to the kids, at Monday meetings, I want to be able to read you a poem, right? I think about it now, it's like so ridiculous. And the kids were like, okay. And so I would read the poem, and I used to have this thing where I always read a poem twice, but with our kids at Big Fish, I could feel it wasn't like the right environment. Because our kids, they're 11, 18, and some of them they're all different. But anyway, and then we started getting complaints about having the meeting anyway. I mean, the meeting was like announcements and scheduling and whatever. Sometimes Mike, our singer, songwriter, storyteller, would like play a game or tell us a story. But a lot of these kids are introverts, and they don't like big group meetings, or the extroverts take over. And then they called it forced community meeting. So we stopped having them, and now we have something on Tuesday afternoons called Big Fish Think Tank. And we sit around the couches by the windows, and we just throw out questions like, what is Big Fish? How's it? What do you like about it? What do you wish was different? Where, just sort of a think tank.
I love that. So you first sensed even before the feedback was there, you were like,
they're so honest.
Them.
they're so honest, and they're just like, oh God, there she goes with her poem.
They had a voice in that, and there was a change made through that,
right.
Which is beautiful. Okay. I know you brought some.
Oh, I did bring.
Is there something?
Well, I know. How long do you want your podcast to go? No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm going to tell you the title of all three, and then I'm going to, or two. Did I bring three? Yeah, but I'm only going to read one.
Why don't you choose one?
Okay, but I want to just tell your audience the titles of these poems because they're all beautiful, and if you don't love poetry or you feel intimidated by poetry, I mean, my goodness, start with Rumi. Right? I mean, start with Rumi. And then, Mary Oliver died the day before my mother. And I thought, oh my gosh, she was sort of a second mother to me in print, right? And my mother really took a long time. She had a long hospice. Like, she wasn't conscious the last 3 days of her life, and I kind of sat by her. But I thought, wow, Mary Oliver died. And it's kind of a wonderful, I was like, grab Mom on the way, read some poetry. So the one by Mary Oliver, there's Wild Geese and The Journey. I probably will read Wild Geese. A lot of people may already know that. The Rumi poem that uncovered by Coleman Barks, who's a beautiful translator of all of Rumi's work, is called Two Kinds of Intelligence. And that's That's a good one.
I may hang on to those, by the way.
Yes, I'll give it to you. Yeah, no. Well, and the two kinds of intelligence is about, books and your own inner life. So that obviously resonates with my philosophy. And then I started doing this weird thing where I did become a little obsessive. I was like the poem lady. So I always carry poems in my pocketbook. And there's one called You Can't Write a Poem About McDonald's, but it's a poem about McDonald's. And I can't remember the author, but I remember having some in my bag and going through the drive-thru with my son, and I just went, oh, perfect. So I gave the woman, I said, you work at McDonald's, you really should read this poem. And it's a really fun poem about McDonald's. So the one that I carry around with me almost everywhere I go, and part of it is to well, let me just say this. This is like the completely narcissistic, but I think we all are on some level, is that I do this and share this kind of work because it helps me be a better, nicer person, right?
Exactly. That's what healing and self-healing is all about.
Yeah, maybe if I read this poem. No. So the poem is called Kindness by Naomi Shibab Nye. Oh, if you don't know her, she's American-Palestinian woman, father. She lived in Israel for a while as a young woman, like a teenager. She's now in her 60s, lives in Texas now, and I've met her a couple times. I love that.
I feel like
she's amazing.
I'm a geek for all things healing.
Yeah, I'm a geek for all things poetry.
And poetry is healing.
Oh, right? It is healing. And I was sitting at the local private school up here, Burke Academy, often does a lot with poetry, and they have a lot of money, so they brought in Naomi Shibab Nye, because she was poet laureate, U.S. poet laureate. I mean, she's big. She's big. So that's when I first met her, and my friend Janet and I were sitting, and, when you love words and somebody puts them together in a way that is so delicious, you just go, wow, yeah, it makes everything possible. So this was about 4 years ago, and Janet was sitting next to me, and she's a retired school teacher, and she says to me, oh, poetry's going to save the world. And I thought, yeah, she's right. And so when we start learning to talk to each other again, like some of these young people, like Mary Ann Williamson is trying to do, right? And, she and many others, then that's when we'll heal. So what was I going to tell you about this? What was the other question?
Kindness.
Oh, kindness, yeah. So this is
one of the ones.
This is one of the ones I was carrying with me, and because that was the piece that was so missing in public school. I don't think it was ever anyone's intention. So I went to school, right, from 5 to 22, took a year off to find a job, and then stayed. So literally most of my entire life has been in school. And what I've noticed, and I think it's the fear-mongering and the analytics and the need to be results-driven.
It's almost like it's not the school, it's the feeling and the intention behind it.
They've lost it. That's the point, right? So it's well, what do we want for our kids? And so now, the self-harm among young women has doubled in the last 10 years. If that's not, and I was seeing it, my husband kept saying, your anecdotes are not real research, that's not reliable. And I'm well, this is what I'm seeing. And then I could find the research to back it up.
Yes, so, unfortunately.
Right, and that is the sort of why it's this is my leap of faith on two levels. First of all, maybe I'm absolutely delusional. What I see, my heart was breaking in school. And I think I was starting to get sick to my stomach driving to school the last couple of years. And I was making good money. I had this great health plan, right? And it was whatever. I've never been motivated by money. Great.
It's a leap.
It is a leap, but it was, I think we, as a culture, don't check in. If you're getting sick, if you're getting sick going to work on your drive, well, duh, right? Same thing with kids. If someone needs to go to school refusal therapy, that sort of sounds like conversion therapy to me. It's just, it doesn't make sense. Something's wrong. So poetry gives us a place to start. And kids are funny because we've had a couple of poetry classes at Big Fish, and the kids are battle fatigued. So they're really self-conscious about their words and anything they put on paper. So I'm feeling like it's so much slower to do any kind of creative writing with them. I think in my public school life, I was more successful teaching poetry in a way because I was like that classroom where they could sort of go, oh, oh, good. We're not going to get picked on in here or have to, get judged all the time. But at Big Fish, they don't get judged all the time. But they're really self-conscious because a lot of them have been told they're failures, right? Which is another problem with our system of schooling.
I feel like we're getting
we want the
schools, which I love.
I love. Do you want to? Yeah.
I
wanted to read. I think Wild Geese is probably. It's probably the most popular poem of the ones that I've picked. But I also, I think she's got beautiful message.
I think I'm going to try to find links to these.
Oh, sure. They're easy to find. You can give a salute to the goddess Mary Oliver, who just left this earth. She had a beautiful career. She lived in Provincetown, Mass.
Oh, really?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, really wonderful woman. So the poem is called Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things.
So beautiful.
Isn't that the greatest? I have read it 100 times and I cry every time. I mean, and back to my mother again, is that, and I don't know the poet who said it, but the priest at her funeral said, we are walking each other home. We're all walking each other home, and I think that's what people struggle with.
Yes. Thank you. That was beautiful. Okay. Thanks. So I want to sort of finish up with your practices of self-care.
Oh boy.
Which poetry is one of them. Just give us like a few examples. When you're starting to feel out of sorts, what do you do?
First thing I do is I walk outside barefoot. That's grounding. Usually I need to sleep more. That's a big part of it. And drink more water. That's always your good reminder. I think I've always been start-stop daily practice. Like I'm not one of those people who has, like I have a friend who's like run almost every day of her life, pretty much like, for me it's always different. So someday, like for a while it was walking, I was like, walking. So I would say what I do is I need alone time, silence, meditation, in silence, yoga of some sort, by myself usually. Just that's a private thing for me. Just moving, music, moving alone, doing yoga, and nature. Like if usually those are the things. Either I started eating refined sugar and I feel really bad, or too much bad food. But more than anything, reminding myself to go out into nature every day. So I think it's so many things like.
And it keeps changing and shifting.
It keeps changing, right.
That's what I find too. And then I find during my cycles, in my menstrual cycle, as also cycles of the moon, I know I'm going to be not sleeping much around full moon.
Right.
So my journey is that I'm becoming more mindful of those cycles. But it's fun. Right? We're not this like linear. And even if you're not on your menstrual cycle, there's still the cycles of the moon and the cycles of life. Like, you had children, they grew up and they left.
Oh, and menopause is a whole new thing.
Right.
So we have another interview on
another
that.
conversation about that.
No, it's okay.
I think it's all these different colors and sensations and being open to whatever your day is bringing up and then sort of rolling with that, right?
Well, the beauty of getting older, I think, and this is where, call it menopause, call it just being in your 50s, is, you get to practice being yourself, right? So that's kind of like, that's one of my little mottos, and I don't know if I made it up or if I stole it from someone, so if I stole it from you, or let me know. But I always would say, and I say this to everyone, if we are what we practice, who are you?
I remember you saying that.
Yeah, I say it all the time. I mean, because the kids will be like, I just want a video game, and I'll be like, all right, you're really good at video gaming. That's who you are then. Like, what else do you want to practice? So for me, I'm practicing being a director of a nonprofit, which sometimes I resist. I want other people to run it, and I'll just play with the kids, which may happen eventually. I'm okay with that. So it's good. So yeah, I think we are what we practice, and it is always changing. So getting older, and I'm pretty much an open book, and I think it's fun to share what you've learned, because it's like, if you're not becoming a better you, well, how are you spending your time? Act on your own behalf, right? And that's where I think women often, we do too much, and I'm guilty of it. And I think that's where menopause is clarity, where you start to go, oh, my kids are grown, they can take care of themselves. My husband's grown, he can feed himself, And so why do women take on so much? Well, that's a good way to keep us under wraps. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to AOC lately, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the youngest woman in Congress, and I don't care what political party you resonate with, that woman is on fire. I mean, she's just speaking her truth. I think it's almost like a tribe of ancestral women coming through her voice. I mean, she's like, listen, this is just not right. This is harmful. You're hurting people. People.
Yeah, the feminine is rising.
Yeah, the feminine is rising, and I feel like I'm just on the ship with all. We're all waking up, because if you're not awake now, then all right, then fine. Yes. There's just. And it does start with the children. I think they are our barometers, right? If I don't know what the actual numbers are, I have them in my notes, but if self-harm among young women ages 12 to 17 or 18, if that's doubled in the last 2 years,
something is not right.
Something's not right. And we've had rashes of teen suicides, and so that goes back to the reflection piece. So that's where I think we all get stuck in our culture, is we build this infrastructure. And I talk about schools as being this similar thing to people had horse and buggies, and then Henry Ford came along, and then we got these automobiles, and we had to build all these roads. So people I do see the brick and mortar, compulsory ed, you must do, earth science and biology and chemistry in this order as being kind of the horse and buggy. Because now these kids are actually learning more faster.
Catch up to them.
Yeah, they teach, half the time they're teaching us. Like the kid who came in and said, I can help you build a computer.
Right.
I mean, I already have my own website. Do that. Do you want to add merchandise on your website? I can, do you need more REM? Or no, it's RAM. So, literate I am about that. REM is sleep. So yeah, these kids, they know so much more than we knew. And I know you're even a younger generation. We have to, it goes back to Socrates, really. It's about mentorship. And mentorship started for thousands of years when somebody was about 12. So that's 6th grade. And that's exactly, those are my people. And I'm like, of course they're miserable. They want to be doing real things. They want to be cooking, and they want to be building things.
Yeah. So talking about websites, where do we find more information about Big Fish?
Big Fish, bigfishnh.org. Our website is decent. It was a little bit better, and then we let the students redesign it. Were you around for any of that? It was a bit of a debacle. Well, we gave, and they did everything. They did a rebranding, colors, and They have scrolling pictures, but they're missing some of the information. So meanwhile, we're in the process of going back to Squarespace. They did a lot of things right, but they the pictures are a little grainy because they got them. They'd been passed around electronically a few times, and so the quality of our website, as we've been told by our board, could be better. But it's the students rebuilt it using Weebly. So bigfishnh.org. I'm Diane at bigfishnh.org with Diane with one N. And if you're ever in Dover, New Hampshire, we always love to have guests. Our youngest is 11.
I kind of want to say also, if there's an educator watching this, or if there's someone in the community who wants to work with teens in a meaningful way, find Diane. Yeah. Right?
Well, and the other big thing we're finding is they're not as, well, you remember how they really resented, Domla wanted us to do all this?
I know, I wanted to do a lot with
Well, I know, but it was sort of like, we have some classes like that, and some kids ask for that, and then a lot of kids are just like, wow, she's way too demanding. But the other magic that's happening is these one-on-one or one-on-two connections, where, we just met this young guy who has his own tech company, and he comes every Thursday for a couple hours, and he's teaching the kids binary, and they're working on the hardware of the computer and then coding. And it's just the three of them, And that's more organic than trying to do a curriculum. Because I think they're curriculumed out. Although they ask for things, they'll be like, I really...
So we're gonna put it out, and I know there are a lot of healers, yoga teachers listening, so if this is something that you'd like to explore...
Oh, please.
Here you go.
Yeah. Send me an email or... Yeah, that'd be great.
Is there anything else you'd love us to hear? I feel like I could listen to you
forever. I know. I'm a rambler. No, I think, well, obviously when you find something that really, for me, that big leap was just when I met this network. So we're part of a network called Liberated Learners. If you go to that website, we're 15 centers now. And we're becoming a little bit more cohesive. We're trying to have more of a presence as a network. So it's liberatedlearners.net, I think. And, this obviously resonates with me. I think and I've been really trying to keep my enthusiasm up in the last 5 to 10 years of my teaching job. But I was getting less freedom too. And if you talk to teachers, nobody's teaching because they want to torture kids. That's not why they go into teaching. And I think anyone who is teaching understands that you do want your kids to be human first. But you put all of these restrictions in the way, whether it's, everything needing to be quiet all the time and not being able to leave the building and all of those things. We're not having enough resources or having too many kids or too many kids that don't want to be there. And it's hard to be the public school. Like the superintendent says to me, we have 4,000 kids in the district. 4,000 kids. And I know there are districts and urban districts that are much bigger. And that's where I think it is about smaller is better. Mentorship is better. And that's how, what else is there?
Right.
Right? I don't know. Right. I'm simple in that way.
Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. This
Thank
has been
you.
an absolute
Oh,
pleasure.
fun.
I love the tone of your voice. I feel like that alone was healing.
Fun. Well, I'm so blessed you're in my life.
And yeah.
I think without you, I mean, seriously have helped me kind of channel my healing a bit, focus my healing. And I think we all, women out there and men too, because there are a lot of very giving men, of course, is that we sacrifice ourselves. We think that, we're doing the right thing, right? But we're no good to anybody unless we're whole.
Right. So invest in your
you for
self-healing.
Being whole. Thank you, Domla.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. If this conversation resonates with you, if you want to find more about Diane, so I'll include those links at the end. But if you thought this was healing and inspiring for you, please share it in whatever capacity feels authentic to you. I tell people, even if it's telling one other person.
Sure.
Or some people are more social media savvy, so this will be on YouTube, it'll be on Facebook, so spread the love, share it. So
maybe you want to start a learning center.
And if you do, find that.
Let me know. Shift is on. All right. Thank you, Domla.
Thank you, everyone.
Great.